4-6 is about completing the square. The first part, we're going to talk about just kind of solving. Notice how there's no b term here. So the easiest thing to do is just go ahead and subtract 10 here. You end up with 4x squared equals 36. Divide by 4. And again, this is nothing new. You get x squared equals 9. Solve here for x, take the square root of both sides. You end up with x over here equals, now this is where people mess up. The square root of 9 is 3, and so you're going to give me 3. But the minute you see a 2 up here, that means there's 2 answers. If there was a 3 up there, it would be 3 answers, 4 answers, and so on and so forth. And we'll get into that later. But there's 2 answers here. Well, I only have 1. Well, how do I compensate for that? Well, when you square something, a plus 3 and a negative 3 are actually your answers. So plus or minus 3 is what you'd say. So if you're going through here, you add 5. You end up with 3x squared equals 30. Divide by 3. I get x squared equals 10. Square root both sides. I get x equals plus or minus the square root of 10. Again, there's my 2 answers. Here's where we're talking about completing the square. The form here is, this is the first part of your quadratic, x squared plus bx. To complete the square, you take your middle term divided by 2 and square it. So what value completes the square for x squared minus 10x? So what's my middle term? Again, there's no c, so I go to what is in front of the x. That's negative 10. So my completing the square is negative 10 divided by 2 squared, which ends up giving me negative 5 squared, or 25. So how can I justify this? Well, if I take a look and I just plug this in as my c, I end up with x squared minus 10x plus 25. Now, let's factor it. AC number, 25, or you could do that if you look and both these are perfect squares, that's my hint. But my AC number is 25. What's going to give me 10? Well, 5 and 5. So negative 5 and negative 5. Take your shortcut, x minus 5 times x minus 5. Okay, and then we can just write that as x minus 5 squared. Notice that that negative 5 and that negative 5 are the same. That's kind of what they're talking about. Problem 5, solve by completing the square. So again, another way, it's just a quadratic, it's another way to solve it, but the completing the square thing, I don't really recommend that you ever solve anything by completing the square. It's kind of easier, but I wouldn't do it that way. I would do quadratic formula personally. But here, what I want to do is I want to get this to the other side. Okay, so I end up with 3x squared minus 12x, leave a space, equals negative 6. Now, the problem being is that you see that first term a, I can't have anything there. It has to be 1. So since it's 3, what I got to do is divide everything by 3, get rid of it. Okay, that's going to cancel. I end up with x squared minus 4x, leave a space, equals negative 2. Well, let's go ahead and complete my square now. Again, remember, it's negative b over 2 squared. Well, what's my b term? My b term is negative 4. Okay, so I'm going to take that and I'm going to go ahead and take that term, negative 4, divided by 2, square it. But since I added something new here to the left side, and that's why I did in red, I've got to add the same thing on the other side. Now the trick here is to just leave it there. And what I mean by that is x squared minus 4x plus negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2 squared. I would just leave that there, and I'm going to show you why in a second. I get over here negative 2 plus, and then negative 2 squared is going to be 4. Why do I leave that here? There's no reason to go ahead and do that. What I'm going to do is just bring that down, and you end up with x minus 2 squared. And that's what it factors into every time. So that's why I leave the negative 2 in there, so I could just bring it straight down into the parentheses. It saves me a step. Equals 2. Well, now we got to solve. So how do I get rid of that square? Square root both sides. I get x minus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 2. What do I do now? Add 2 to both sides. I get x equals 2 plus or minus the square root of 2. And that's your answer. example 6 is what is writing this in vertex form. So what is y equals x squared plus 4x minus 6 in vertex form? We've talked about it, trying to factor. But if I look at my AC being -6, I can't get 4 from my factors of -6. So what is the other way that I can do that? Well, so if I rewrite this as x squared plus 4x, leave a space, minus 6. Well, why am I leaving a space? Again, I'm going to go ahead and complete my square. How do I complete the square? Well, I'm going to go ahead and add 4 over 2 squared, b over 2. Well, again, I can't add it to one side and not to the other side. But in order to counterbalance that, I'm just going to go ahead and subtract 4 over 2 squared. Okay, so the reason I'm doing that is because I can't just add something to one side and not the other. So in order to do that, I can just go ahead and subtract it, and that's fine. So what I end up with here is x squared plus 4x plus 2 squared. And I would leave it like that. I would not change it. And then in your calculator, -6 minus 2 squared, is 4. So -6 minus 4 is -10. And leave it out there. So here now, to write it in vertex form, bring it down. So that's a +2, so it's x plus 2 squared minus 10. And there's your vertex form. That one's a little crazy. We'll have to go over that in class. But that's, parabola is a conic section, and you got to get used to completing your square and writing it in that form. To finish the problem off, naming the vertex. Okay, again, opposite in parentheses, so -2, and then what it is outside the parentheses, -10. And my y-intercept, if I went ahead and I plugged 0 in for y, what would I end up with? I'm sorry, not where y equals 0, where x equals 0. That's why it's the y-intercept. What you end up having here, if I take it and just plug it back into here, okay, what do I end up with? The x's cancel out, and you end up with a y-intercept of -6. And since it's y-intercept, it's 0, -6 is a point.